India has issued an advisory on travel to Canada, also urging Indians in Canada, especially students, to exercise utmost caution. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. We continue to look at the diplomatic fallout of a relationship that seems to have been pushed to the brink. This after Justin Trudeau made an astonishing claim in Canada's parliament without offering any accompanying evidence. He claimed that India, or rather agents of India, were potentially responsible for the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. What happens next? The Washington Post reports that Trudeau tried to get the Five Eyes, referring to the five countries in partnership with Canada, to issue a joint statement against India before the G20, but none of the countries consented. Foreign envoys and foreign leaders are reacting, but most of them have limited their comments to say that they have viewed the developments with concern and that the investigation should take its own course. But the ramifications of this are many. This is not only about India and Canada, but also about now what the geopolitical ramifications may be. Let's introduce our guests on the program today as we continue to look at this big international story. Veteran diplomat Ambassador KC Singh is with us. Welcome to the program, sir. Also joining us is leading strategic affairs analyst Sushant Sareen with the Observer Research Foundation. Also joining us from Canada today is a journalist and analyst, Daniel Bodman. Good to see you, Daniel. And joining us from Washington this morning is one of our best known foreign policy experts and journalists, Seema Sirohi. It's a pleasure to see all of you. Sushant, let me start with you. You haven't been holding back on social media or on television. The government has issued a strongly worded advisory. What happens next, Sushant?
I don't know what happens next. I think things are not, nobody is dialing it down. I don't think the Indians are in a mood to dial it down just yet. Because after all, there is a lot of reputational damage which happens when unsubstantiated allegations, or as Trudeau calls it, credible allegation. Now, what is a credible allegation? Nobody knows. And when you come out like this and you start hurling scurrilous allegations of this sort, then obviously there's going to be a pushback. Number one. Number two, Barkha, you have to admit that, and the advisory today, I think, has been very well worded, because the fact of the matter is that the Canadian government under Trudeau has actually condoned hate speech against Indian origin people, against Indian missions, against Hindus. They've actually condoned it. They have actually turned a blind eye to violent incidents which have taken place. They've allowed these thugs and these mafias to get away scot-free, partly because this Khalistani clique seems to be very well organized and politically very active. And clearly, I agree that sovereignty of every country is very important. But just because you're Canada, your sovereignty is not more important than my sovereignty. When you pander to and pamper these kinds of goons in your country who have a direct link to crimes in my country, they are involved in political assassinations, and they are openly proclaiming and taking responsibility for those, right? They are involved in drug running. They are involved in all kinds of gangsterism inside India and directing it from Canada, something which Dawood Ibrahim was infamous for. And all of this is happening. And if the Canadians say that, well, this is freedom of speech and this is freedom of conscience, I don't know what kind of conscience Justin Trudeau has. But this is neither freedom of speech nor it is freedom of conscience. And Indian sovereignty is as important as Canadian sovereignty is. So for them to pretend as though they are on some kind of a rarefied higher pedestal, and we brown folk don't count for anything, and our sovereignty does not matter, our security does not matter, I think is simply unacceptable. So I think there is a major pushback coming from the Indian side. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I suspect there will be action taken on this whole OCI PIO cards, which have been misused by many of these characters. In fact, they have claimed that they have come into India, carried out hits, and gone back to Canada. Yeah. And I'm sure this is not acceptable. So clearly, there's going to be a pushback. Where this finally ends, I don't know. But I think
Yeah.
it's extremely unfortunate because between India and Canada, this should have never happened. I don't know why the Canadians have allowed this tiny fringe, or even if it's not tiny, even if it's a fairly large minority within the Sikh community, and majority of the Sikhs, even in Canada, do not subscribe to these guys' views. But they are held hostage, just as the Canadian government has allowed India and Canada relations to be held hostage by these guys. And I think it's extremely unfortunate what is happening.
Yeah, and I think on the very day, by the way, this was unfolding, you had a brave Sikh soldier dying in the line of duty in a Kashmir encounter. And that is how we have known the Sikh community in India. So I just wanted to underline that. But Ambassador K.C. Singh, Gurpatwant Pannu, who's the lawyer, in fact, for Hardeep Singh Nijjar, while Trudeau was in India for the G20, was speaking at a public event where he was calling for, quote unquote, the political death of the Indian Prime Minister, Home Minister, and Foreign Minister. In separate videos, he's asked Hindus to go back. This is Nijjar's lawyer. When we see Trudeau making the allegation that he has, India is pushing back as a diplomat. How do you see India's response?
No, I think it's graded. And I agree with Sushant on this, that probably it'll escalate because we don't see Trudeau backing off, because in today's New York Times, there's an unnamed Canadian official who's saying that we have the information, we have the intelligence, but because it's been obtained from our partners in the Five Eyes, which is the four other countries and Canada, which are together in an intelligence alliance, we don't want to reveal it as yet. Now, I don't know whether that's just a bluff or they have some more information, but very clearly they're not going to stop here. They're obviously going to go forward, especially when all their partners like Britain and Americans are saying, please complete your thing. Because if after completing it, he's still not able to say something, show something, that's going to be terribly embarrassing for him. So I don't know whether he's just bluffing or he has something more than that. But nevertheless, leaving that aside, what Sushant is saying is, the question is, why haven't we made a good enough case on all these things for so many years?
To whom? Good enough case to whom?
Both the governments, the Americans and these guys, seek extradition of people. Why are we blocking the OCI cards now? If we've had the information, we should have blocked it of all these persons earlier. I think what's happened is the number who have in the radical camp has increased after the killing of Niger. I don't think there was a very large number before, because then the popular protests took place, people came out on the streets. Then people who were sitting on the fence or even moderates, it becomes very difficult for them living in Canada to dissociate themselves. So it's got muddied. The situation got very, very muddied. And we've known it since 3 months when the protests were starting, that the Canadian government was under pressure. It was not doing anything. Popular protests were there. And Trudeau's had his own personal problems. His divorce, his standing in general political standing is down, etc. That he is coming under pressure. And if the Canadian NSA came to India earlier and apparently shared the information with us, at that stage we should have been alerted that something was afoot. And we should have prepared the ground with all this, because after all, against Niger, we've had a FIR since 2018. So in the international community, you make a case and say, did we seek his extradition? Did we present the documents there? Did the Canadians turn it down? There's not much information available in the public domain.
Okay.
So we should have had the Canadians on the back foot.
Okay, so Shan, briefly, of course, India has been protesting every few months. In fact, the Canadian High Commissioner has been summoned this past year more time than the Pakistanis, and that's saying something than any Pakistani diplomat. Quick response, then I need to go to Seema and our other guests.
Barkha, as far as I know, India has been taking up this matter with the Canadians, but we've been taking it up diplomatically. Perhaps that was our mistake. Maybe we should have gone to town and done what Trudeau is doing. Maybe we should have behaved completely undiplomatically and done certain things which would have actually agitated this matter more. Now, clearly, the extradition request had been put, an Interpol notice had been issued, all kinds of things had been done. We had been protesting to the Canadians about what had been happening, and there was no action taken, none whatsoever. And then for these people to pretend, just a year back, there was another killing of that other fellow, Ripudaman Singh Malik. What happened in that? Wasn't that a gangland killing? Aren't these guys involved in gangland killings? So
Yeah.
this has been picked up by these fellows and blown out of proportion, because please remember, the extremism has not started because Niger has been bummed off by somebody. The
Of course.
extremism has been going on for many, many months, many years, in fact, and has been steadily picking up. So I think this is not entirely correct to say that, suddenly in the last 3 months, people who were sitting on the sidelines or people who were sitting on the fence have suddenly become radicalized. No. Look at the kind of turnouts which were happening in some of these gurdwaras and other places where they were holding these referendums. To say that all of those guys were, they were fence sitters and suddenly they've become radicalized, I don't think so. And then maybe on the 25th, let's see what happens. Will the Canadians protect the Indian missions as the Khalistanis are threatening to storm them? Or will they allow that to happen? And if that happens, then all bets are off on what will happen
Absolutely,
next.
absolutely. Seema, I want to talk a little bit about the global response, right? You have Washington Post reporting that there was an attempt to reach out to the Five Eyes to get these countries to come together to issue a public statement, and Trudeau's attempts did not work. We've so far seen pretty generic statements from all of the sort of global powers that were tapped into by Trudeau. What's the view from Washington?
Well, clearly the Biden administration is in a tight spot because on the one hand, you have Canada, a major ally, a neighbor. On the other, you have India, a country that the Americans want a really strong relationship with for their larger geopolitical objectives. So obviously, they didn't want to issue a joint statement before the G20. And I was talking to people in Delhi yesterday, and they said the Canadian delegation, when it arrived in Delhi for G20, was really kind of off color because of this. They wanted to make a splash apparently during G20 or to somehow create problems. So the Americans obviously did not want that, because their intention of having a successful G20 was very clear. Now, going forward, what happens is going to be interesting. How will the Americans walk the tightrope? Will they be able to tell the Canadians to do this behind the scenes, or, act as a mediator? We don't know. But clearly, the State Department response so far is kind of boilerplate, I would say. They are very deeply concerned and they want India to cooperate. I think the real response will come from the White House, as and when Prime Minister Trudeau is able to present whatever evidence he is talking about.
Yeah, and today the US envoy to India announced that Biden's been invited also back to India to be the Republic Day parade guest on the 26th of January. So that should also be interesting given everything that's happening all at once. Let me actually bring in Daniel Boardman, now journalist based out of Canada. What's the view from Canada? In the last few hours, we've seen a potential sort of dialing down, a backpedaling, as it were, by Trudeau. In an interview to Reuters, he said, I didn't really want to provoke the Indians. We just want them to cooperate. India is hopping mad. At the same time, you have the leader of the opposition in Canada that initially seemed to be supporting him on the floor of the House, talking about more facts, please. So what's the view in Canada, Daniel?
Yeah, the Canadian view is a little complicated. I mean, it can best be summed up by most Canadians don't know what's going on when it comes to this. This has come out of absolutely nowhere. It's over their heads. They might remember Trudeau making a fool of himself back in 2018, dancing around like Justin Trudeau. And then this has sort of been sprung on us. I would, if you go onto the streets in Toronto out now, ask people, what's the Khalistani movement? 99 out of 100 confidently would go. So when it comes to like the high level politics, you hit it right with Pierre. The leader of the opposition, I think India would have to understand, you have to sort of back the government. When we make the ridiculous claim that the Indian government's behind this extrajudicial assassination in the country, and his thing is, I'm the only one who's seen the evidence, trust me. Well, we've now started to fight with a geopolitical ally. The Conservative Party opposition has to back the party to present a unified front. But what you're seeing the next day is Poilievre kind of came out and said, I would support the government if this is true. I mean, if it's true that Modi authorized some extrajudicial assassination, then we have a real problem. But right now, we're just taking Justin Trudeau's word for it that he's seen something. Poilievre said, well, he hasn't showed me this. And it adds extra context in Canada because just recently and over the last few years, there's been a lot of Trudeau scandals where the intelligence agencies have sort of created controversies out of obviously false information that was like kind of created by government-friendly journalists to begin with that was later retracted. So the Canadian government, the Trudeau government specifically, does not have a good track record of saying, we have an intelligence report that we're going to follow.
Daniel, before I go back to Sushant and Casey and Seema, why now? Nijjar was killed in June, right? Even then there were murmurs. I was interviewing Canadian journalists, and they said, people here trying to pin it on the Indians, but it's clearly a gangland hit. 4 months later, why now? Why now? How do you explain the timing?
So one thing I can give you some strong advice. If you're trying to decipher the motivations and reasoning of Justin Trudeau, you're going to go insane. There's no explanation for why this is done. This is the stupidest thing the country's done in the last 50 years. So if you want me to explain why anyone's doing this, I can't. But he's tanking in the polls. He's getting obliterated. They're 15 points below water. This NDP who's supporting them, they're also tanking. Jagmeet Singh's, of course, very pro-Khalistani. And he just got back from India. There's all this pressure of foreign interference from the Chinese. So he might want to throw it onto the India, confuse that whole scandal. There is no explanation for why Justin Trudeau is doing what he is doing. This is like if you were to open up a how not to do geopolitics textbook, this was literally every step and then got the bonus questions right too. So if you want an explanation for why now, what's he doing? There is nothing. Just, I don't know. You talk to some ancient diviner, toss a bunch of bones in a cup, throw it on the ground, and that's why Justin Trudeau is doing what he's doing. It is truly, I cannot explain it, and you're going to go insane if you try.
Yeah, and Sushant, it's very difficult to explain to the West how Trudeau is almost like a trigger warning for India. Like every trip of his has been a debacle. Sorry, Sushant, I'm going to come to you, but Seema had an interjection. Seema first, and then Sushant. Seema, yeah.
So I just wanted to make a short point about Khalistan politics and the inability of the West and Western journalists both to understand it or to put things in context. I mean, the stories they write, even in the Canadian press that ought to be better informed, are just sort of context-less. Then, when you come to the US, we had attacks on the Indian consulate in San Francisco, right? No arrests so far. This is despite that the Americans are somewhat more better sensitized than perhaps Canadians. Canadian government, Trudeau is not doing things because he's basically bonded with the Khalistanis. He's taken a side. He's doing what he is. But the Americans, not so much, right? Yet, local politics in California is such, no action has been taken so far. And everything was on CCTV.
Yeah.
To identify those 2-3 guys should not have been difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But let me as we take sort of final few minutes, Sushant, let me bring you in. Daniel's making the point no one can decode Trudeau. But let's look at it from geopolitics. Seema did speak about, the Americans in particular being under pressure now to walk the tightrope. Trudeau has come under pressure from his own opponents on being sort of late on the China interference. So he's made this foreign interference sort of label now something that he's maybe overstating from an Indian perspective. Go ahead, Sushant.
So, Barkha, 2-3 things. Number one, on this whole foreign interference thing. What about the foreign interference which takes place from Canada and India? How does that work? It's a two-way street, right? If you have these Khalistanis trying to interfere and insert themselves and influence Indian politics either through money or some other means, that's not acceptable to us. What about that foreign interference, right? What have the Canadians done about it? Secondly, as far as the global system is concerned, look, India is getting closer to the West on the Indo-Pacific and many other fronts, not necessarily because we are in love with somebody, right? Or they are in love with us. It is because they need security and we need security. Okay? If my ally is going to undermine my security in my own house, I'm afraid that's not an alliance that really works very well for me, does it? You can't be sponsoring all kinds of despicable elements in India and then say, oh, okay, fine, now let's cooperate with each other on Indo-Pacific or on China or some other damn thing. It doesn't work that way. Thirdly, on this whole Trudeau question, look, there was a case sometime back, I think last year or year before last, in Britain, where the ISI had paid a local Pakistani guy to go to Netherlands and bump off a Pakistani dissident. Okay? The Brits got wind of this whole case. They arrested the guy, the man who was going to commit the murder. They arrested him. They tried him. They've sentenced him, I think, to 25 years in jail.
Yeah.
And the entire thing has come out that the money was transferred from some account in Pakistan to this fellow, etc., etc. The whole thing. But the Brits probably have issued the warnings quietly and silent to the Pakistanis that this game does not happen in our country. They've handled it. Okay.
So
Trudeau would have done the same thing if he wanted to. If he had any evidence, has he arrested anybody? In the last 4 years, if they have so much intelligence against India, there would have been somebody who's committed the murders. Okay, probably locals. If have you arrested those guys? Has there been a single arrest? Nothing.
Yeah.
Then on
I think that
you stand in Parliament and you hurl these allegations against India without any evidence.
Casey, you said Trudeau should have, the government should have seen this coming. What should the government, other than cancelling OCI cards, have been doing instead, according to you? And do respond to what Sushant and Seema have raised.
No, I think when the killing took place, after that, the protests which occurred, I mean, Sushant can say what he wants, that the number is there, so many are radical, so many are not. Very clearly, many more people came out on the streets than is this normal support of these people in those countries. And this is not today. It's not the first time something has happened. There are times, decades ago, when people with swords went inside the consulate in Vancouver and almost attacked the consul general. So we've had this, there's a history of this from the 80s. You know about the Air India bombing and so on and so forth. So this is not the first time that this has happened. So we have our own knowledge of how to deal with this. And look, there are two parts of it. One is the one there. If you handle the problem in Punjab the way you want to handle it, no Nijjar can upset you. Khalistan has to be created here. It can't be created in Vancouver. So, if the problem arises when you're not able to handle it at this end,
there's hardly any. Sorry, I'm interjecting only to say that Khalistan seems to me very much a diaspora story. It's not a Punjab story.
No, but you see the rise of Amritpal. He came and within months, the kind of following he got means that there is something which was churning here.
And then he sank without...
nobody took any action. Our government didn't take any action. Central government let him go around for 6 months till he had become really a pain in the neck of the political system. You take the other thing. What is at the root of all this? It's been brewing from about 2015 when the Beadbi took place, when you had the desecration of the Holy Granth. Who was behind it? The Dera Sacha Sauda. And how does the Haryana government deal with the Dera head? And for God's sake, he's a convicted rapist, murderer. And twice in a matter of 6 months, you give him 30 days off and 30 days off and deal with him with kid gloves. Because now BJP has started doing what Congress was doing earlier. He was Congress's favorite electoral vote bank. Now somebody else requires it. Has anybody done an analysis what impact this has on the average village kid, on the average person in Punjab? No. If you don't deal with your domestic situation sensibly, then you're worried of one bloody Nijjar there. They've had these referendums. What is the net result of it? What have they amounted to? They're just tilting at windmills. But the problem arises when we allow a domestic and the external to get intermingled. So if you're safe at home, if you're secure within your own territory, let them do all the nonsensical talk they want there. They will just stop talking after a while. And at the same time, bring all the proof in public. You say he was a terrorist. Since 2018, you have had a FIR. Bring all that in the public domain. Okay, you filed. I haven't seen any extradition request properly pursued. Has it gone to a court? Has a court rejected it? Is it lying with the Foreign Office there? Make an issue out of it. It shouldn't take you 8 years to be, or 5 years to be sitting around. Just file an application and sit back. You have to follow up on your things.
Let me get Daniel to come in before we take closing comments from Sushant and Seema. Daniel, what do you expect the Canadians to be doing next? Because like we said, that Trudeau didn't offer any evidence. He spoke about an investigation that's ongoing. Then he expelled an Indian diplomat basis an ongoing investigation. The Western powers that he's reached out to are going to say, show us the proof. Let's even war game this, using that phrase loosely, colloquially. Let's even hypothesize and say, okay, he offers something and he says, this is the proof. India has already dismissed this allegation. So unless there's some sort of clinching, impeccable sort of intelligence, then if he had that, wouldn't he have placed it before Parliament?
Yeah, this is where a lot of Canadians are with him is, and you have to understand, this makes a lot of sense. If you're going to start a fight with an ally, a democratic ally who shares similar alliances with you, and you're going to start a fight based on an incident, and you have, if you're going to go to the international community, go to the Americans, the Italians, the British, everyone we trade with mutually, and say, hey, India's the bad guy because they did this. All the allies are going to ask, okay, how do you know that? And if you can't show them, here's the email from Modi, CC, assassination of Singh Nijjar, please kill him in Canada right now. Like, if you can produce that, then...
I'm just laughing because obviously there's no such,
Yeah, but Trudeau sort of claimed on it. And there's more context here to the Canadians is we've seen evidence. So, right now, the Canadian perspective, what's happening in Canada is this is really a story of Pakistani foreign interference being framed as a story of Indian interference when the real story at the time is Chinese interference. So this is Canada. So in the Chinese interference scandal, we had the proof. We had CSIS, our intelligence, trying to leak to the public. Here's the proof. Here's the proof that a Chinese sitting diplomat was threatening the family of a sitting MP for being critical of, Beijing's aggression. Threatening his family. We had the proof. It took us a week as a country to collectively scream at Melanie Joly, Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland. There was tracking Twitter things, still in Canada, still in Canada, still in Canada. So we had the proof that he was harassing people. And it took us over a week to get this guy kicked out of Canada. And there was evidence that he was harassing a sitting MP's family. So I've seen Justin Trudeau look at hard evidence of foreign interference from a hostile power and be like, no, it's all good. But now we have secret evidence that we're all supposed to start a fight with India over.
Yeah, I want to pick up that last line of yours, Seema. A Pakistani interference framed as Indian interference when the real problem is Chinese interference. And we all know the Hudson Institute has an excellent study on the linkages between Pakistan and the Khalistan groups operating out of North America, operating out of countries like Canada and the US. Seema, go ahead.
So, yes, the experts in all these capitals know the ISI is behind a lot of this propaganda that comes out of a very few Khalistan supporters. So whenever there's a protest in Washington, at least, they're about the same 20 people who will come outside the Indian embassy. It's not as if the 1 million Sikhs in America are with them. They're not. The politics of the gurdwaras is very intense. But I want to make one larger point. Just think about who benefits from this whole episode. It's China, right? If they're able to drive even a bit of a wedge between India and the West, or loosely the G7 or whatever, because India is getting closer to them, it benefits them. And the ISI is the cat's paw for all this kind of stuff. So that's something I worry about. Because reputationally, as and when Trudeau comes up with whatever kind of evidence he has, India will have suffered a little bit of reputational damage, right? Because yes, Sushant is exactly right. When they assassinate people, the West assassinates people, takes out enemies of the state. In other countries, nobody bats an eyelid, because they go and kill people in Iran or Afghanistan. Nobody bats an eyelid.
Or Pakistan. Or Pakistan. Let's not forget Osama.
It's
Yeah.
taken for granted that their cause is right. These are real terrorists. So
Yeah.
let's see how that works.
That's an excellent point, Sushant. Very briefly, closing comment. China trying to drive a wedge here. Are we missing the real adversary?
I don't know if China is trying to drive a wedge in this whole thing or Justin Trudeau is trying to do it. Because who's blown this up? Trudeau has.
Yeah.
And I agree with what Seema is saying, that look, the bigger game is this whole, this monster called China, which is sitting on everybody's borders, right? And if Justin Trudeau, for whatever reason, for his domestic politics or whatever other reason, he wants to blow apart this relationship, okay, fine, go ahead, do it for whatever it's worth. We'll see how the chips fall where they will. Secondly, Barkha, I do not disagree with what Ambassador Singh is saying. In fact, I would go back to 2005 when the Akali and BJP had formed the government, and the first posters of Bhindranwale and all these other characters started appearing in the gurdwaras in Punjab. That was the time to put your foot down. So I trace it back not to 2015. And in fact, the Sacha Sauda fellow had, committed some stupidity earlier as well, when there was a huge uproar, and that was before 2015. Yeah. There was a huge uproar even at that point of time. So that has been happening. But our domestic problems should have certainly been handled better. And I'm not absolving anybody of what has happened out here. But to conflate or to explain away the kind of dissemble and deception and kind of actions or the inaction of the Canadian government, which seems to be hand in glove with some of these characters. This wasn't the problem under Stephen Harper, was it?
Yeah.
But how come when Trudeau has come, suddenly these guys have come out of the woodwork and...
I think Casey is wanting to come in briefly, and then I'll let Sushant close. Yeah, Casey?
No, Sushant, the implication is that I'm saying I'm absolving the Canadian government. No, I'm not. I'm saying keep your house in order and pin them down where you want to pin them down and anticipate it. Barkha, you're asking what should we have done? When the street protests were taking place after June the 18th, it was quite clear that that was the narrative on the streets in Vancouver, that the Indian government, why do you think they attacked the Indian missions? We should have been proactive after that. We should have realized that this is the narrative that's building up. We should have anticipated that here is a loose cannon called Trudeau, and he may just mishandle it further. You see, diplomacy and anticipation are two sides of the same coin. Diplomacy, keep waiting till Trudeau does something stupid, and then you start jumping up and down. This has been clear for 3 months that this narrative was on its way.
Okay, the implications are real. We have Book My Show cancelling the Canadian Indian singer Shubh for positions he's taken, maps he's shown on his Instagram feed. So these are things that you never thought would really happen between India and Canada. They're beginning to happen. Sushant, I'll let you have the closing word with a reminder to our audience that when Trudeau came in 2018 to India, he pretty much did the same. This is Trudeau's act over and over and over and over again. He supped then with Atwal, if you remember, another Khalistani. So, Sushant, closing word.
Yeah, it's, I think Canada is unfortunate to have Trudeau as its prime minister. He screwed up their economy completely and messed up their foreign relations and their internal security. And India is unfortunate that, there is a Canadian prime minister like Trudeau who has spoiled relations. See, if Trudeau thinks that he can wear those nice flashy kurtas and, jiggle around a little bit, we'll be very impressed. That's not going to happen. Maybe he has a very, colonial kind of a thinking about what India is, that you come out here and you shake your butt a bit and everybody will fall in love with you. I'm sorry, we moved on from there. So maybe he needs to wake up to what India is all about. It's not the India where, a white man would come and speak in Hindi and everybody would, be gushing over the guy and saying that, oh, wow, he's such an Indophile. Sorry, now let's talk business, right? Yeah. Do you protect my security? What do you bring on the table? What do I bring on the table? That is the way things have to be conducted. And I agree once more with what Ambassador Singh is saying. Although I say that the Indian government has constantly plugged this issue with the Canadians, maybe we should now start doing it far more publicly. Maybe we should bring out some kind of a white paper, if at all, and I'm talking very loosely out here, about all the representations we have made, all the protests we have launched, everything, so that, it's out there in open that, look, this is what we've been agitating for. And there has been virtually no action from the Canadian side. They've been doing this virtue signaling of freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, as though calling for the genocide of Hindus in Canada is freedom of conscience.
Yeah,
what do you say?
I just want to say the bottom line is that I don't know if it's going to get better. That's the Pannoon video asking Hindus to go back to India. But this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better, if it gets better. That is the one thing I think we can agree on. Seema, I was going to say goodbye. Are you trying to say something? Seema, can we unmute Seema?
Very quick point. Very quick point. The lawyer of Niger lives in America. This Pannoon.
Correct.
He's a one-man machine. And I think media, all of us, are somewhat responsible for making him a personality. He should be completely not be given any publicity. And I think the US government needs to move on him, because he has called for assassinations and all sorts of things. I blocked him on my email because I could no longer bear to read what he was sending. And he's a machine. He sends tens of emails every day.
Yeah, and he is a US-based entity, but he was making these calls for political death out of Canada. So just want to underline, that's the lawyer of Hardeep Nijjar. Leaving it there, this story isn't ending anytime soon. We'll keep a close eye on it. Thank you, Ambassador K.C. Singh, Seema, Sirohi, Daniel Boardman, and Sushant Serene. A pleasure. And to our audience, see you soon. Have a great evening. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.